This documentary is about the monumentization of the vernacular. We will look at the history and theory of modernist architects and figures, as well as the development of vernacular brutalism and regionalist qualities in housing. By 1900, this new image of modernism began taking shape in every European country. Otto Wagner had quickly decided to scrap the Renaissance curriculum in favor of one pledged to defining a new style for modern times. Many architects and key modernism figures were in attendance at one of Professor Wagner's addresses in October of 1894. A quote from Wagner: "The new style must further express an emotional and intellectual change." Modernism, during this period in Holland, is more or less associated with Hendrik Petrus Berlage. Berlage shares many affinities with his Vienna colleague, Wagner. Le Corbusier, an early founder of modernist and brutalist ideas, worked with his cousin Pierre Jeanneret. Key modernist architects were coming out of England in the early 1930s, including Walter Gropius and Berthold Lubetkin. This was a transformative moment in time due to new technologies, construction techniques, high demand for housing, and mass production. I don't think that anything more serious is happening to modern architecture at the present moment than that it is growing up. 1948. At a symposium at the Museum of Modern Art, Joan Ochman makes the point about the traumatic events of the Second World War as the source of the intense questioning that faced modernist architecture.
According to Ochman, this period in architecture culture is dominated by historically specific problems: reconstruction, housing shortages, rapid urbanization, mass production, minimum dwelling, and technological innovation. Brutalism was a reaction to the post-war American consumerism, the international movement, and a modernism offshoot. Construction had to be quicker and cheaper. Due to rebuilding needs, governments wanted mass housing projects, and new demands for modernist architects emerged.
The year 1945 appears as the historical moment between the socially committed ethos of the New Deal, meaning improving the lives of people, and an incipient impulse towards monumentality. This last seems to have emerged partly out of the demands of America's status as a world power, and partly out of the cultural anxiety that attended the end of the Second World War. Also around this time, Britain possessed neither the material resources nor the necessary cultural assurance to justify any form of monumental expression. If anything, the post-war tendency lay in the opposite direction. Both with architecture and political matters, Britain was in the final stages of relinquishing its imperial identity. While the work of Edmund and Home may have sparked the invention of the term New Brutalism, it was in England that the radical reaction that it denotes first arose. On another level, the brutalists responded to the challenge of people's detailing by making a direct reference to the socio-anthropological roots of popular culture. Up to the mid-1950s, truth to materials remained an essential precept of brutalist architecture, manifesting itself initially in an obsessive concern for the expressive articulation of mechanical and structural elements. Brutalism has been deemed particularly suitable for monumentality, and hence civil and cultural structures. Accompanying the desire for monumentality was the behavioral assumption that this quality behaved like a magnet for spending leisure time in and around a building. Brutalism also became popular with governmental and institutional buildings in the modern architecture period, and most of the well-known university campuses have been built in this style. Like brutalism, vernacular brutalism focused on affordability and local needs for housing in the mid-20th century, post-war. This is a less common term, as it categorizes brutalist buildings that have adapted regionalist aspects. There was a move amongst certain architects and reports in the architectural press that sought to review architecture through expressive, formal, and vernacular design. Among other factors contributing, like the emergence of regionalism, this being some kind of political change, an aspiration to some form of cultural, economic, and political independence. Like vernacular brutalism, regionalism conveys an honesty in materials. One interpretation of regionalism was by Mumford. He talked about architecture reflecting cultural values. Unlike modernism, the regionalist approach primarily revolves around including regional features in design and is opposed to standardization, focusing on society, local material, identity, and place. In time, different movements such as critical regionalism and vernacular modernism have also emerged with their distinctive discourses. As Carloni suggests, the strength of provincial culture resides in its capacity to condense the artistic and critical potential of the region while understanding and reinterpreting outside influences. The work of Carloni's student, Mario Botta, concentrates on issues that relate directly to the specific place while adapting methods and approaches drawn from outside influences. Some key architects and brutalist figures who started thinking more vernacularly after the mid-90s were people like Harry Seidler, an extension of Marcel Breuer's modernism, José Louis Sert, and his student John Andrews. Also, well-known figures like Corbusier and Louis Kahn, to name a few. Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret had already thought of their domestic architecture of the late 1920s as having a strong link with the natural environment, but they had never previously conceived of this connection as taking place on such a monumental scale. They began to imagine their works as reaching out across and being influenced by landscapes of titanic proportions. The idea of the composition is structured by the landscape. Le Corbusier's concern for the sculptural resonance of a building in relation to its site was first formulated around 1923. This subtle shift towards a topographic sensibility contrasted with their spontaneous acceptance of vernacular construction as a mode of expression. The designing vernacular demanded extreme care, since the elements of construction were the only architectonic means. From now on, the juxtaposition of contrasting materials became an essential aspect of Le Corbusier's style, not only as an expressive palette, but also as a means of building. This shift to natural materials and primitive methods had consequences that went beyond a mere change in technique or surface style. Above all, it meant abandoning the classical envelope that had been used in the villas of the late 1920s in favor of an architecture based on the expressive force of a single architectonic element. Louis Kahn's contribution to the debate on monumentality had already been joined by José Louis Sert, Fernand Lagarde, and Siegfried Giedion with their 9 points on monumentality. The movement had, in any event, to be more sensitive to the issue of popular acceptance, and to this end, its anti-monumentality stemmed directly from its use of native materials and its response to topography and climate. This can be called the need for a new monumentality. Kahn himself had argued on the same occasion that monumentality is, or can be, difficult to interpret and understand. It cannot be intentionally created. A quote from Kahn: "Neither the finest material nor the most advanced technology needs to enter a work of monumental character for the same reason that the finest ink was not required to draw up the Magna Carta. It has to do with the full complexity of making architecture work in the fullest psychological sense. It works because it supports place with a spiritual quality inherent in structure, which conveys the feelings of eternity." During this period of modernism, the vernacular brutalist buildings that appeared were monumental on both a large and small scale. Some monumental vernacular brutalist works that share these principles and theories include James Stirling's Woolton House in Liverpool, England, 1954. Designed with a creative tension between brutalism and vernacular traditions. Unlike many projects in the modern architecture era, it acknowledges a cultural tradition. Le Corbusier's Maison Jouol in France, 1955. The facades are made of brick walls with bands of raw concrete, which contrast with the timber walls and window frames in the openings. Flat roofs with greenery can also be seen in this building. Harry and Penelope Seidler House in Sydney, Australia, 1967. This vernacular brutalist house was designed as the Seidlers' family home, This building has been designed into the existing slope of the site. The interiors consist of natural local stone and timber. John Andrews, University of Canberra, Student Residences, in Canberra, Australia, 1973. Andrews designed this modular housing to follow the existing slope of the site. These buildings are constructed with exposed concrete, with a contrasting soft material of the color-bond curved roofs. The development of ideas surrounding the monumentization of the vernacular created a change that influenced how people expressed material and site in a more connected way. Vernacular brutalism, adopting these aspects, became a new way to envision monumentality at different scales. This movement helped to further provide a stronger connection to cultural and local relationships in the modernism housing period.